I would like to live in an area that has a climate where it has an occasional frost, but it doesn't get too cold, and where it has a sufficient rainfall for most things, but a certain amount of irrigation could be necessary. I would like to see the amount of land per person is around about 1.5 hectares per person. And I would like the main town of the group to be around about 1 million people. I should think 3 or 4 market towns, each with somewhere approaching 500,000 people, and the remainder of the people living in the countryside, where they have farms or bits of land that they look after. Instead of having individuals being owners of land, the land is belonging to a family, an extended family, which would be a couple of groups of parents, some grandparents, some children, and some visitors who are trying to learn what they're doing or just want to join them. It's within the group, there wouldn't be any money changing over. It would be fairly similar to a kibbutz in that people did what they were best at, and they looked after the land and managed it in a way that gave them as much self-sufficiency as possible, but not so much that they weren't able to call on neighboring families or groups or the market town for things that they didn't do for themselves. You'd have a place where it was a little bit hilly, perhaps for having your dairy farm on, not particularly good for ploughing too much, but quite good for pasture. I think the family should be able to create its own energy. It should have solar panels, windmills, hydroelectric, whichever is suitable to the area, and use as much as that. And they should have a small area which is permaculture, so that they can grow as much food as the climate seems suitable for. It would be nice to have somebody who was particularly interested in either music or possibly folk dancing or acting, so that you had a group within your area that could be taken from one farm or another, so that you could put on a small play or something like that. But different interests of people should be allowed. And the people within the group would sort out as best they could. The grandparents would spend a fair amount of time looking after the smaller children who would get their early instruction, which is probably the most important part of their instruction, from their own group. And possibly one of the areas in the families would be a school where once children are old enough to go to school, they can go there. I would like to see a group of people so that they were able to give the milk. The dairy company would make butter and cheese, which would go to the local market town. They would have a milk round where they would take it to those groups that didn't want to milk their cows. But in the same time, all the modern techniques of milking should be used. I think it would be nice to have the cows doing their own milking when they felt they wanted to be milked, not bring them all in to get milked together, have a robot milking machine that gives them feed according to how much milk they give, and lets them come in and get milked and go away again when they feel they've had enough. And it should be possible to eliminate most drudgery work until people are only doing the kinds of work that they want to do. I think next to the hills and getting up into the mountains a little bit, where no longer there is a lot of good land for growing things, it should be common land, and it should be under the control of the World Federation. But there might be a forestry group on the corners that has a way of looking after their forest, collecting the mature trees that are ready for making timber and things, and never clear felling, but keeping the trees open and well spaced so they don't get diseases, and have sufficient understory so that the soil is looked after, and the animals that live in the forest all have space to live, and the forestry family would not be producing its milk or cheese. It probably would be, it might have a cow, but it certainly have a couple of pigs, so that it could use its waste rubbish, and it would slaughter them and have its ham and bacon when it wanted to, but it has different things that it can't do itself. It probably wouldn't make chainsaws, and it would have to go to the nearest capital town where they probably made them, and it would be able to use the money that they get from making timber and furniture to buy the things that they don't want to make themselves. I think it's terribly important that you have groups of people rather than individuals applying for a job. For instance, in the market towns where you have a hospital. Clearly, the hospital has to get cleaned. But instead of having different cleaners that do the job, I would like to have different families putting in quotes to do the job, and so that if a member of the family who would normally be doing something is ill or wants to go on holiday, they can, and somebody else in the family is taking over while they're not doing it, to make sure that the job is done. It's important that people have freedom to not do something when it's not suitable, but at the same time are responsible for seeing that it does get done. So many things that can be done in a society are better done by a group of people than by individuals. I think the piece of land that I have, it would be nice to have a national park, which would be common land, looked after by the state. But again, licenses could be given to work on various things that are needed in the national park, because when we end up having a large part of the world for people to live in, the management of nature is going to be necessary. So rather than actually saying we'll let it look after itself, most places should be managed, and licenses to do the managing that usually could be done at a profit, usually are licenses are bought from the central authority. But it would be nice to have a neighbour somewhere that you could visit quite easily and talk things over with, but you would belong to your own place, and that would be where you lived. That's the way I would like to see the country that I live in.